I experience hypnagogia.
I experience hypnagogia.
I see people mostly. They will be standing there by my bed. I see sort of men, women, all backgrounds, all ages, sometimes in modern clothing, sometimes in period dress. They're always smiling at me, not in a creepy way, in a really loving, warm way. Like they're happy that I can see them. I see spiders sometimes, and I see geometric patterns, very intricate, elaborate, fantastical, colourful, beautiful, swirling, merging patterns on the ceiling, transposed across the curtains, always superimposed against the backdrop of my room. They all are. All the hallucinations are like that.
I see spiders mostly. Lots of spiders. It can be one, it can be multiple spiders. I see sometimes orbs floating around. Probably most often, I see objects that really are in my room behaving in a way that they should not be behaving.
So, welcome. Can you tell me, please, your name and your title?
Yeah, I'm Guy Leicester. I'm a professor of neurology and sleep medicine at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospitals in London.
So it's Professor Dominic Fitch, and I'm a Professor of Visual Psychiatry.
My name is Jackie McLeish. I'm a spiritualist medium and I'm from Glasgow.
My name is Marina and I'm a Jungian psychotherapist.
I'm Adam Powell. I'm a lecturer in medical humanities here at Durham University, and I work on religion, religious experience, mental health, that sort of thing.
Reverend Mother Alison Dunlop Shanes. A special area, supernatural religions, so I do talks on things to do with the supernatural in religions.
How do you pronounce hypnagogia?
How do I pronounce hypnagogia? Hypnagogia?
Brilliant. Because I hear it pronounced all different ways. And so I'm like, am I even saying it right? I'm trying to make a documentary about this. Am I even saying it right?
So the derivation is agagos from the Greek, which is conductor apparently, or the entrance into sleep. So I usually say hypnagogic hallucinations or hypnagogia. But there may be many different pronunciations.
So the term hypnagogic hallucination or hypnagogic hallucination was first coined by Alfred Maury, who was a French physician mid-19th century. And it was really a term that was meant to capture the quasi-perceptual experiences that happen as one is falling asleep. So this is things that are visual, like light in the room, or a shadow, or a figure in the room, auditory, tactile, this sort of thing. Often it was meant to really kind of capture these kind of hallucinatory experiences that were quite common but had not yet had really a term applied to them, because they weren't quite dreams, but they also weren't quite waking hallucinations. And of course, in the 19th century, you had kind of the rise of psychology and psychiatry that was starting to want to identify what's a hallucination and what isn't. But these were experiences, often floating shapes or bright lights, this sort of thing, as one's drifting off to sleep.
What is hypnagogia?
Well, hypnagogia itself is a term that is used to describe this state that is probably most akin to relaxed wakefulness or mild drowsiness. It's really that point at which people are transitioning between wake and sleep. Now, it's relatively poorly defined. It is primarily a psychological phenomenon at the moment. In a medical setting, we use the term slightly differently. So we recognise that there are certain phenomena, some of which are normal, so they're part of the spectrum of normal human experience, some of which actually relate to frank neurological conditions that result in hallucinations or movements during that transition between sleep or wake. And particularly with regard to hallucinations, we talk about hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. Hypnagogic related to the act of falling asleep, hypnopompic related to the act of waking up in the morning.
Well, hypnagogia is a term that's used in rather different ways. And so it can be used in a very general way, describing hallucinations. It doesn't have to be visual, so it can be in other senses as well, but hallucinations that occur around the margins of sleep. And what I mean by that is either just as you're falling off to sleep at the beginning, or when you're waking up from sleep in the middle of the night. And of course, you could have lots of wakenings up in the middle of the night. More specifically, in the medical terminology, we used to make a distinction between the hypnagogic hallucinations that occur as you fall asleep and hypnopompic ones when you wake up from sleep. And that there are subtle differences between the two in terms of their significance and things like that. But the general term hypnagogia can be used as well for both the ones that occur as you fall asleep and the ones that you wake up.
So hypnagogic hallucinations, they are, for Jungian psychology, they could be seen as a psychological function or a psychic contact, just like dreams. But obviously they are different, because when we dream, when we wake up, we know we were dreaming, right? And with hypnagogic hallucinations, sometimes it takes us a while to realize what was that, to understand everything that happened. And dreams, they have a storyline, sometimes a dramatic structure, which is, for example, the exposition. So when the dream is starting, I know where I am, which place it is, or even sometimes the time. And the development of the action, when the action starts happening and some tension builds up, and then comes the culmination, which is the plot twist and something unexpected happen, and then the solution or an outcome. And the hypnagogic hallucinations, they're very alive, something very vivid, that it's hard to differentiate whether it is real or not. And dreams, even though while we were dreaming, sometimes we might not know, but as soon as we wake up, we know. And that's the difference, basically.
Yes, I've heard of hypnagogic hallucinations. It's my understanding is that it's when you're going into sleep that you start seeing something. My experiences have been more just prior to coming out of sleep, so I think that's the hypnopompic state. Hypnagogic, I guess, maybe things like you're just about to go into sleep and you hear your name being called, or you hear just like one word. It can be hello or goodbye or whatever. So I've not had too many experiences where I've just been going into a sleep that I can think of. It's been when I've been coming out of a sleep.
I have heard of hypnagogic states, but for me, I think it's a word given to something that we already had, which is a trance-like state. And even if we go back through many religions, they like to get into a trance-like state to connect with other souls, loved ones. For me, that state is super important for us understanding who we are. So yeah, I have heard of it, and I think it just is another word for the crossover of trance.
So my name is Adriana. I am 45. I'm the producer and director of this project, a passion project of mine that has been ongoing now for many years. I really just wanted to lift the lid on this subject because there's not a whole lot about it on the internet, really. And everything that I have found correlates to things like people with narcolepsy or a sleep disorder, or verging into more the mental health or mental illness realms of schizophrenia, etc. But I noticed that there was a group of people who did experience these types of hallucinations, but they were always at a very specific time of day. And that is that time of day when we feel most vulnerable, most relaxed, just before falling asleep. We're going to try and talk about hallucinations in general. And really, we want to destigmatize these things and try and understand what it might be. And we're going to talk to experts across lots of different fields to see what they think. And you're going to hear directly from the people that experience it as well to see how it makes them feel.
A lot of people in that state between wake and sleep will experience strange things. So they will experience some sounds or flashing lights or various other things. But in a clinical context, when you're seeing a doctor, one of the things that we very much focus on are slightly more formed hallucinations that often take a dream-like quality. So they have a little bit of a narrative structure, a bit like a plot evolving in our minds. And what we think is going on there is that normally when we drift off to sleep, we don't tend to enter into REM sleep. So that's the stage of sleep during which we most strongly dream. It doesn't tend to occur for at least about an hour or so after drifting off to sleep. Whereas in some individuals, particularly in those individuals who have very prominent sleep-related hallucinations, hypnagogic hallucinations, they tend to enter into REM sleep inappropriately early, sometimes directly from wakefulness. So essentially what's happening is that there are elements of dreaming sleep, elements of REM sleep that are intruding into the waking mind. And so people typically in that situation describe hallucinations that usually take some characteristic forms. And those forms are often related to, for example, an intruder in the bedroom, a figure standing over the end of the bed, sometimes a feeling of being pinned down or held down by a stranger. Occasionally, actually, sometimes people will say that they have out-of-body experiences, that they are seeing themselves in their bed and that they're hovering above themselves. So those are rather characteristic. There's another potential cause for hallucinations arising from sleep, in that many people, for example, who have sleepwalking or night terrors, will often be woken up and will experience hallucinations that are slightly different from those hallucinations that we associate with REM sleep. In those individuals, they're waking up from very deep sleep, and they'll often see things like animals climbing the walls of the room that they're in, boxes crashing down on them, spikes falling from the ceiling, things that make them feel very strongly in peril. But these, unlike those hallucinations of REM sleep, those hallucinations don't tend to have that same narrative structure that we associate with REM sleep phenomena.
So why do you think this doesn't happen to everyone?
I would love to know the scientific reason for that. I myself have wondered if there isn't a hormonal connection. My episodes started to increase when I started taking hormonal birth control when I was 18. On the other hand, though, we have plenty of men who experience hypnagogia and women who aren't on any kind of hormonal birth control. So maybe a coincidence, maybe some sort of correlation. I also wonder too about the spirituality of it. I experience more episodes when I am meditating, listening to certain frequencies of music. So I wonder if there's something in our brains that's a little bit unique that's triggering these episodes, that maybe brain chemistry or something just isn't there in other people.
Good morning. It's Monday. What day is it? I don't know, we're in August 9th, 10th, the 11th. It's Monday, the 11th of August, and had a really nice weekend. My sister came down to visit from Glasgow, and we went to Manchester for the day. We did a little bit of a around the world cuisine sort of adventure where we went to different places for little appetizers to try different cuisines, and fairly relaxed weekend. Last week I had 2 visitations. So one was this guy that sort of had a black jumper on like this with some white writing there or something, sort of ginger hair. Looked like he could have been a cousin of Ed Sheeran actually. He had those sort of features. And he was on Tom's side of the bed. Again, I must have been facing Tom, and I just kind of opened my eyes, and there he was. This guy was stood up, but he was kind of like, he was facing me, but then he turned to kind of walk away, but he was still looking back, and he was just smiling. He was just smiling at me in a really friendly, like a non-threatening smile. And then either on Friday night when my sister was here, or the Thursday night, I think it was a Friday night when my sister was here, I was facing the other way, away from Tom. And this one was quite cool because this one was super, super clear, and I felt like I was perfectly bridged on the conscious unconscious sort of wave, because my conscious brain felt drawn out, like I could see him for ages. But then so basically it was like a boy of about 10. He looked kind of like he had Polynesian or Hawaiian features or something like that. Big, beautiful brown eyes. He had like brown, kind of messy hair, quite longish. And he had a sky blue top on, so I can see colours, which I don't know if everybody can, but I could see colours. And he was just sort of knelt sort of by the bed like that, just you know. And it's the sort of thing like when you open your eyes, they don't, you know, appear in a puff of smoke like a magic trick. You open your eyes and they're already there. They're already in situ, which is why it gives you such a fright, because you're just sort of opening your eyes. You're not too sure why, and then they're just there. And oftentimes the shock of it, or the surprise of it, brings you back to full consciousness straight away. But because myself and there's like so many others have, when you have it for years and years, you learn to control that fright so that actually you can try and draw it out a little bit longer, but eventually it will disappear. This little boy, he he looked at me the way I imagine a son might look at his mum or something, I don't know. He just was smiling and he just looked so happy that I could see him. And he was just, this is going to sound like things, but he was almost looking at me in that admiration, you know, which is what I get a lot. Like a lot of the people, like there's just like a kindness that comes out of them, and there's like a love that's being pushed forward. And I feel like the impression I get is that they're just really chuffed that I can see them, and yeah, that's what their smile sort of indicates. It's like a warm, loving smile. So with this particular boy, because I opened my eyes and he was there so clear as day, staring right at me, like I say, and I managed to breach the consciousness sort of thing, and I did go, hi, because I heard myself say that. I try and do that sometimes, try and get like a word in or speak to them or something, but it's so quick, it happens so quick. And I just went, hi, like that, and he was smiling. But then, of course, I'm coming up to full consciousness now. But what happened this time was, sometimes they just disappear, but this time it was like a magic trick in reverse. He started to fade. He was like fading, and his face was distorting as my consciousness was coming in. His face was just sort of fading, there was like a cloud of smoke was over his face, and he was just sort of dissipating into it. So, but he was really sweet. I never really see the same person twice. That's another thing. So, strange question. What position do you fall asleep in?
I am mostly a side sleeper. I tend to go from one side to the other throughout the night, occasionally on my back.
And when you are having an episode, do you recall what side you're on?
Funny enough, it seems like when I am aware that I'm having an episode, I wake up laying on my back.
And for our viewers, can you confirm, are your eyes open or closed when you're having your hallucination?
I actually can't tell. My assumption is that my eyes are open because I can be looking at an object in my room, my plants, a piece of art, and I see it moving in ways that it's not supposed to move. So I assume my eyes are open, but I really can't tell.
Perfect. And have you ever experienced this away from home?
I think it's more frequent for me when I am away from home. I don't know if it's just stress or excitement of travel or being in a strange place, but particularly when I stay in hotel rooms, I experience it almost every night in a hotel.
What age were you when these actually started?
So I do have memories as a child of talking in my sleep occasionally. Once or twice I have sleepwalked. I don't think the actual like hypnagogic episodes or hallucinations, so to speak, started until I was probably around the age of 18. That's when I remember the first kind of episodes of the spiders coming at me, waking up halfway across the room, being like, what just happened? And then increasing frequency over the years.
And you've mentioned that you feel like things like certain stressors might trigger it, like anxiety, when you've got a lot going on in your waking life. Is there anything else that you think might trigger one of these episodes?
Yeah, so besides the stress triggers, I do think the meditation, there was a period where I was doing really good about doing a guided meditation every night before bed. And then as the guided meditation faded out, it would play like meditation sleep music for like an hour or so. And it seemed like every night that I listened to that, at almost the same time or same point in the recording, is when it would be triggered. I don't know if that was the time of night that it was, if it was a certain frequency that it reached in the music, but I did notice a lot of consistency with that. I just blanked. I was like, there's another thing that caused it. Oh, yeah. I also, in addition to just stress, in life, also I feel like when I am concerned about somebody else, when my dog had surgery, I was trying to sleep kind of lightly so I could hear if she stirred and I needed to take her outside. And a lot of times that would kind of seep into my subconscious and result in some episodes there as well. Similarly, when my boyfriend had surgery, he got up one night to use the restroom, but my brain had confused what was real and what was not real. And I shot out and was like, oh my, are you okay? He's like, yeah. It's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm just going to the restroom. Like, oh, okay. By that point, I like woke up and was like, oh, he's just going to the restroom. This is okay.
I usually fall asleep on my side or on my front, but I always wake up on my back. I have experienced this away from home. I have experienced it in hotels. I have experienced it in friends and family homes. This has happened everywhere. Now, one thing that I do find interesting is, personally, a lot of my hallucinations are extremely positive, very friendly people, always extremely happy that I can see them. I feel like, sometimes I feel like an animal in the zoo. They're looking at me as if I'm a koala bear or something like that. That's how it feels. It really feels that you're being observed, but they're just over the moon. So maybe humans are the koalas of this side of the galaxy. I don't know, but but these guys really look at us quite adoringly. Maybe they feel sorry for us. I don't know. Interestingly, the only time I've ever had a negative sort of visitation or hallucination, and this is interesting, I've had two, and they were both in caravans. Now, a spiritualist might say to you that that is remnants of bad energy, because I don't know what goes on in caravans, but the only two times I've been to a caravan, it's not been very nice. One was almost like a banshee looking, that was really trying, it came down from the ceiling and it was trying to scare me. And I was so pissed off at this thing for having the gall to think that it could disturb my sleep like that, that I just kind of, I shot up and I just cursed it away. I said, you off, how dare you come into my space like that? And I told it to get gone, and that was that. This second caravan experience, but again, it was a negative entity trying to mess with my head a little bit, and almost a demonic-y, both these experiences have felt demonic-y. Now, I'm a huge horror fan, so it could be that somewhere in my brain I've made this connection between caravans and demons, and that's why this happened. Not that I've ever had anything traumatic happen to me in a caravan or otherwise, never. So I don't know where that comes from. But yeah, I found that interesting. Anywhere else, everywhere else, loving, non-violent, non-threatening entity. In caravans, totally demonic.
You mentioned you've seen geometric patterns and spiders. Have you ever seen people?
One time, I had just moved into a new rental house. I think just the stress of moving was a little extra. And it was a new house, so I thought it was haunted. I thought this was a ghost standing in my room. And so I think it was like a male figure, shadowy. There were no distinct features, no aggression, did not come towards my bed. But that's the only time I've ever seen a figure or a human-like person.
Yes, I have seen spiders. Spiders was one of the big ones that I saw in my 20s. They were usually coming from the ceiling, and they're a very good way of getting your attention, put it that way. Yes, I have seen geometric patterns. I've seen sort of crisscrosses, and often they look like, you know, the images that you see when you're looking into a microscope, and you sort of, or you know, a lot of the stuff that's under the sea, that kind of pattern, like repetitive patterns. It's kind of like that, very neon sometimes. It's just like a cool light show, and I have no idea what it is, but it's entertaining. I have felt someone sitting on my bed just the once when I was in a flat in Edinburgh with some friends from university. We shared a flat together up by the Meadows. It was one of those old tenement flats, you know, with the big tall ceilings. And there was a massive big room with bay windows at the front of the house, and there was a tiny little box room at the back, and there was a couple of other rooms as well. I think they turned it into like a 4-bedroom. And very fairly, the girls and I picked straws to see who would get which room. In the first semester, I got the big room, which was fantastic. And then I think in the last semester, I got the box room, which I was fine with. And but previous to that, one of my flatmates had been in the box room, and we had never discussed our experience in the box room ever, until one morning over breakfast. I came through to the kitchen, I sat down, and my flatmate was there, and I said, that box room, I was like, I'm not being funny, but I felt someone sit down on my bed last night, which I did. And my flatmate that had been in that room, her face just went white, and she just looked at me. Now, we'd never discussed this before, and my sensation of this was that it was an old man. I don't know why, but I just had felt a presence that it was an old man sitting on the bed. By the way, incidentally, after that happened, I did shoot up and put the light on because it felt so real. Anyway, I looked over at my flatmate, and I hadn't said anything about it other than I just felt someone sitting on the bed, and she just looked at me and she went, was it an old man? And I said, well, yeah, it felt like it was. And that we found that quite creepy, quite coincidence, whatever, I don't know, but we'd never discussed it, and we never discussed it after that. I don't think anything triggers it, personally. No, I can't think of anything. Like, for some people it's illness or tiredness or stress or foods or things like that, but no, I don't, I've not put two and two together on that for myself personally, no.
What physical effects do these hypnagogic hallucinations have on you at the time or just after they've happened?
Definitely confusion and disorientation, because I kind of come to and I'm still a little fuzzy of like what's real, what's not real. The more intense ones, spiders, stuff like that, those definitely put me in a higher state of anxiety, heart racing, trying to like calm down, take some breaths so I can fall back asleep, trying to consciously tell myself these aren't real. There's no spiders in your bedroom. It's okay.
Is there an emotion that kind of is consistent with these at all? One emotion that you would say presents itself more than maybe others?
Maybe worry. It seems like it's either concern about my boyfriend, my dog, the objects in my room, maybe the orb or figure itself. I'm worried about the object. So yeah, I'd say worry or concern.
So, can I ask, has this affected your life in a negative way at all? How do you deal with this? How do you interpret this and sort of process it?
Thankfully, the spiders are the only scary or negative episode or hallucination that I experience. I've always been deathly afraid of spiders, so that one is still a little stressful. It doesn't happen quite as often as it used to, so that's great. Otherwise, I enjoy them. Like I said, I love meditation, mindfulness. I actually would love to, well, I guess I have tried and have not yet achieved astral travel, astral projection. I love dreams, analyzing dreams. So I personally love it. It's kind of like this little glimpse into another world, and I would love to train my brain or subconscious or whatever's making this happen to be able to be more aware when it's happening, so I can kind of, look around a little more, so to speak, and try to see, what is this? Where is this coming from? What do they mean? So I enjoy them. There is that moment sometimes where you wake with your heart racing, but for me, it's very quick, and then I can go right back to sleep. So I enjoy them.
That's perfect. That's nice. And you know what? That's a nice thing to tell people as well, because it might reassure them that, like, you know, this is something that we can actually play with a little bit more,
Yeah.
rather than, because it's like obviously different from our normal lives, but we could play with it a little bit. Yeah. And you mentioned that now you can go back to sleep quite easily. Was there a time where it did sort of affect the quantity or quality of your sleep more?
There's never been a period in my life that it's affected my sleep more or less. I generally am a pretty deep sleeper. I can fall asleep pretty quickly. So even when I do wake across the room, heart racing, I can be like, oh, this isn't real. Climb back in bed, roll over, go right back to sleep. Occasionally, and I think when there's a lot of stress going on in my life, that's when I might not be able to fall asleep, or I do fall right back asleep, and then it just happens again and again and again.
So initially the physical effects were like a rush of adrenaline and pumping of blood around the body, feeling quite perplexed, I guess. But because it's been happening so long now, I know what it is, and I actually, like, I welcome it now. I'm like, oh, hello. Oh, who are you? These are the thoughts that are going through my head as I'm trying to teeter between consciousness and unconsciousness, which is difficult to do, by the way. The emotion that I feel most is a real warm feeling of feeling loved. Whatever is looking at me is doing so adoringly that I just get this big wave of warmth and love and safety, and it's nice. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case for everyone who experiences this, as I have found out since talking to other people. For some people, it can be very invasive, very negative, paralysing, lots of not nice things. And I do believe that some of that stuff, especially the sleep paralysis and the sleep terrors, there are things that can cause a lot of that, like sleep disorders or past trauma or anxiety and things like that. But then for other people who don't really have any of those things, then I can't explain that. I don't know why that's happening. No, but what we can be sure of is we're not alone, and this is why I'm making this documentary, because if it's happening to us, it'll no doubt have happened to one of you watching. And if not this type of hallucination, then maybe a different type of hallucination. And I hope that the documentary can shed some light on what kind of hallucination you're having, or vision that you're having, let's say, and to help you categorize that and find your place with it, and to take away the fear element, really, a little bit. That's my hope. The first thing I do after it's ended is I do try and go back to sleep. But imagine you are out on a drive in your car and you're driving along the road, and suddenly this big, beautiful, multicolored rainbow comes across the bonnet of your car, and some face comes up and starts smiling at you, and you're stopped at the lights. It's like expecting you to carry on that drive to work and not think about that. You know, that is hard when you have an experience that almost just takes you out of your common reality. It's very difficult to just go back to sleep, because you feel that you've just had a glimpse of something other, or something outward. Now again, a lot of people will say this has all been generated, but it doesn't feel that way, you know. And why are we generating it? If we are, why are we generating people that, you know, I mean, I'm saying I've never seen these people. It's very, your brain through your eyes picks up 7 million times more than what you can remember. So even if you're walking down the street, you won't remember people that you've seen, but you know, your brain's like a photographic machine, so it will have images in there of randoms. And there's an argument to say that these are just randoms that you've seen, but to take a random and then animate them to be doing something or smiling at you, like, do you know what it reminds me of? You know, you see these AI adverts where you have a photograph, and it's like a photograph of like an old ancestor in a war uniform, and they're like, you can make your old photograph of your grandma come to life. And then they show you it animated like that. Like, that's kind of what it's like. No, this has not affected my life in a negative way. I mean, you know, I never thought in my life that I would actually complete a book and write a book. And here we have two, a novel and a novella out of this thing. So, and now a documentary that I'm making. So, no, it's not affected me negatively. You know, has it disturbed my sleep? Sometimes a little bit it does, you know, because I'm just too excited. I can't go back to sleep. I'm like, oh, who's that? Who's that person? And, you know, the way it makes you feel, it's lovely, you know, and yeah, that can disturb your sleep a little bit, but you do get off back to sleep. And it's more for other people. If it is a jumpy one or something like that, I can, oftentimes I'll go back to sleep before my husband does. So in that way it's negative, because you don't want it to impact your loved ones, you know, negatively. But as long as everybody knows what's going on and there's no danger there, then it's fine.
So when we refer to a liminal state of consciousness, we're really talking about this kind of idea that you're neither here nor there, right? So liminal literally comes from the Latin limen, which is referring to thresholds, so the threshold of a doorway or passageway. But when we use it in this kind of adjectival form, what we mean is a liminal state is that state between, in this case, waking and sleeping, or sleeping and waking, but it's that transitional moment where there's a kind of porosity. So we now refer to it as a particular state of consciousness, precisely because we've come to realize and learn that it's not a kind of clean break between being fully awake and then suddenly being fully asleep. There's a transitional phase, and there's a lot of interesting things that happen in that transitional phase.
Okay, so what sleep disorders may cause hypnagogic hallucinations?
The very characteristic neurological disorder that puts people at very high risk of developing these hallucinations, particularly associated with something called sleep paralysis, which is where you wake up, you have that hallucination, and you feel that you can't move at all. It's actually a neurological disorder called narcolepsy. So narcolepsy is a relatively rare neurological disorder that influences how your brain regulates whether or not you're awake or asleep, whether or not you're in dreaming sleep or in non-dreaming sleep. And so because of that inability to regulate those normal sleep cycles, people will often go into REM sleep, into dreaming sleep directly from wakefulness. And you can then begin to see why you might experience these hallucinations, and also why it may be accompanied by sleep paralysis, because actually during dreaming sleep, during REM sleep, we're completely paralysed. The only muscles that continue to work are the muscles that move our eyes and the muscles that allow us to breathe. Everything else is switched off. So if you're going into dreaming sleep directly from wakefulness, it's not necessarily that surprising that you may have these sorts of experiences. But actually, we know that the occasional hypnagogic hallucination is not beyond the realms of normality. We know that there are certain things that can increase the likelihood of these hallucinations, in particular sleep deprivation or disrupted sleep patterns in particular. So the kinds of people that we see them perhaps a little bit more frequently in are individuals who are doing night shifts or students who are burning the candle at both ends.
Have you ever been diagnosed with narcolepsy, the condition, where you could fall asleep sort of throughout the day because of lack of sleep?
No, no narcolepsy.
Okay, perfect. So we can rule ourselves out of that category and the mystery continues. So you mentioned that these things, you sort of made a connection there about the contraceptive pill, which, funnily enough, is another commonality that we all share. When I was reaching out for volunteers for this, I didn't really get a lot of male, sort of people approaching. And I don't know whether that's just because there weren't that many in the group, or whether maybe socially, I don't know, women, and this is a very big generalization because I know plenty of men that can talk very openly, but as a generalization, maybe there's just a little bit more stigma there for men to talk about this. I don't know. So, but you said that you did notice a change in the frequency around about the time of taking the pill. Do you think that's an area that would be worth investigating in this phenomena?
I do. I think it would be interesting because I think, at the root of what's going on, it's got to be some sort of brain chemistry thing, and hormonal birth control or really any prescription medications obviously contribute to what's going on in our brain. And so I do think that would be interesting. I'm curious too if statistically more women experience hypnagogia than men, or like you say, if the men just weren't as active in the group or as willing to participate. The only other people I have met or encountered that experience it happen to also be women, and that's our group. So it's hard to say outside of that. I would love to see some scientific study into that more.
I think this doesn't happen to everyone because there could be a biological element to it. I have found that this phenomena is very common in women who are on the contraceptive pill, which is interesting. Because if you think about women when they're pregnant, have you ever heard a pregnant woman say to you, "Oh, I've been having some crazy dreams, since I've fallen pregnant. My dreams are so intense and they're so..." What that tells me is that when you're pregnant, your hormones change considerably. Your body is undergoing a physiological, biological, emotional, psychological change. Everything is changing to prepare you for pregnancy and giving birth and being a mother, etc. And when you're on the pill, the pill essentially is a drug that simulates pregnancy, or some of the symptoms of pregnancy, or some of the effects of pregnancy so that you do not become pregnant. So you're tricking your body into thinking that it is pregnant so that you don't get pregnant. That's how the pill works. So what I found interesting was that with a lot of the people I spoke to, a lot of these symptoms, or not symptoms, but a lot of these hypnagogic experiences started when they started on the pill. And it was the same for me. Now, I was 21 when this started. I started the pill at 21. I'm not saying I hadn't had intuitive or spiritual or otherworldly kind of experiences before that, because as a child, I can think of quite a few experiences like that. But it is interesting that it's women who are on the pill and who, when they started the pill, it kind of coincides with the time that this started. So that leads to the question of what is happening in the body, biologically, physiologically, hormonally, what is happening that is kind of opening this door to very intense, colourful, vivid, lucid dreams.
Sleep is not one state, it's a multitude of states, and actually we tend to divide sleep into REM sleep, which is usually described as dreaming sleep, and non-REM sleep. What we see when we monitor the brain waves of somebody who is going to sleep is that there is a gradual slowing of those brain waves. There are new features that occur. Essentially, the electrical activity slows down. And then when we hit REM sleep or dreaming sleep, actually when we look at the brain using EEG, which is electrodes on the scalp looking at that electrical activity, we actually see those rhythms speed up, and in many respects the brain waves of REM sleep look rather similar to that of wakefulness rather than the other stages of sleep. So what we see is that through the course of the night, the brain states, according to the EEG, fluctuate. They cycle every 90 minutes or so, going through a period of non-REM sleep, then REM sleep, and then non-REM sleep again, perhaps 4 or 5 times over the course of the night.
They seem to be in kind of the early sleep stages, kind of right after I've fallen asleep, or if it's a restless night, I'll kind of go in and out of them until I fall into a solid sleep.
Usually with hypnagogia, I am on my side, or sometimes it's when I'm turning to get into like a final comfortable position before letting go. That's when I'll be like, oh, what's that? Because I actually have 20/20 vision as well. I've got really good vision. So if there's something in my periphery, I'm not going to miss it. Like I'll see it. And usually that's what catches my eye. And I know for a lot of people, when you give your eyes time to readjust to the dark, your brain could fill in dots and you could see all sorts of things in the shadows. But this is not like that. This is, imagine etching on a black piece of paper with a white piece of chalk. It's very distinguished.
So while we define sleep according to those brain stages, it's quite clear that as well as sleep not being one brain state, that actually different parts of the brain can exist in different stages of sleep. And that's, for example, why some individuals experience sleepwalking or night terrors, in that certain parts of the brain can be in very deep sleep, whilst other parts of the brain actually exhibit waking-like behaviour. And so if you begin to think of sleep in those terms, that actually different parts of the brain are not necessarily in the same brain state, then you can begin to understand why, when you're flicking between wake and REM sleep, actually there may be a degree of overlap there. So the way that I liken it is actually, we expect our brain to change gears very, very rapidly, slickly, like a Formula One car. Actually, for many people, the gears grind when you change gear, And that's what causes many of the manifestations of sleep disorders that we see in the clinic.
Scientifically, there's a lot of talk about, people with narcolepsy experiencing this, or people with, certain other sleep conditions. But from the women I've met, we don't have narcolepsy or any other sleep conditions. So, yeah, we just don't know.
I saw one recently. It was an article about sleep paralysis, but I've never experienced sleep paralysis with my hallucinations. So it was interesting to read, but it didn't apply.
Have you had it on its own, like without the? No. Yeah. No, me either. No, I don't think I have. I did in Amsterdam, but then I'd accidentally eaten a whole muffin thing. I'm surprised I didn't kill myself. But yeah, I had that thing where my eyes open, but my whole body was just completely gone. Yeah. Yeah, I was like 20 or something, just being an idiot. But so I never touched the stuff ever again after that.
I mean, I've never taken it for any like medicinal or pain or any remedies like that. The first time actually was in Amsterdam, and it was a brownie, and it didn't do anything. By the time we got back to the hostel, it started to kind of kick in just as I was going to bed, and it was like a next level of hallucinations. Like the silhouette of the tree outside my window was a dinosaur. The wallpaper was moving. My bunkmate, I kept hearing her getting up to get sick. So I shined my flashlight down there. She's sound asleep. Like it was just, and I thought, oh, it's Amsterdam. There must have been something else in that brownie. Like I'm tripping on something else. But any other time I've had an edible here in the States, not to that level, but the same thing happens. I see and hear things that aren't really there.
So I guess what that means is for people like us, we probably don't even need that stuff as much because we're already halfway there.
Right, yeah, we're already there. It takes what happens in our sleep and now lets it happen while we're wide awake.
Yeah. And actually, you've just done a good segue for me there, because one of the things I'm going to talk about in this documentary is I am going to touch upon different types of hallucinations and what they are. There's a lot of stigma sometimes with hallucinations, and that's one of the reasons why I want to do this, because I don't think having hallucinations in any form should be a stigma. I think what's important is just understanding maybe why it happens. And I feel that we're in a little category where I don't know if we're ever going to get an answer for us. So obviously on that then, just to almost, because a lot of clinicians are saying that people that get these types of hallucination fall into certain clinical categories. And these categories are schizophrenia, psychosis, or a dissociative mental illness. But with us, we don't get these hallucinations when we're awake. There's a very specific time frame where this happens to us consistently, and that is as we're going to sleep. So in light of that, so we're on record, have you ever been diagnosed with schizophrenia, psychosis, or any form of dissociative mental illness?
Nope, no diagnoses.
I have never been diagnosed with schizophrenia, dissociative disorder, psychosis, or any other mental health illness similar to that. When these hallucinations start, of course, that is the first place that your mind goes to, because you think hallucinations and you think, oh, there's something wrong with my brain. That's not necessarily the case. And even for those who are schizophrenic or psychotic and have these hallucinations, it's very important that they also know that this is not their fault. This is not something that they should be stigmatized for. It's just an associated symptom of a condition. That's all it is. And for those of us that don't have the hallmarks of schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia or things like that, we might not have the hallmarks of that, but we still do experience hallucinations of a sort. It's just that ours are very, very specific in when they happen. Still happens.
So there's a very long, rich history of kind of the intersection of religion and dreams, and this kind of notion that dreams are a legitimate kind of conduit for religious revelation. So this goes all the way back to something like Australian Aborigines or the ancient Hebrews. We certainly find, for instance, in Hebrew scriptures, many cases of God speaking to or prophesying through dreams. So you can think of something like Saul, who was the first king of ancient Israel. And he's an interesting case because we hear about his dreams and how God's using those dreams precisely because he says that God has stopped doing so. So he's lamenting that God has stopped speaking through dreams. But we find this in the Christian scriptures, where we have Joseph, the father of baby Jesus. He's warned by a supernatural entity in his dream that he needs to take the baby Jesus and Mary and flee to Egypt. But we can see many, many cases of this throughout history. The ancient Greeks, for instance, had temples to Asclepius, who was the god of healing and medicine. In these temples, one thing that a supplicant would do is try to fall asleep, because if they slept there and received a dream, that dream was thought to have been from the gods and could bring them healing.
Can you tell us about an historical person who identified the moment between waking and sleeping as a privileged state, and how that might have manifested for them?
So there are a few examples in history of important kind of religious or spiritual figures who identified that liminal state, the kind of hypnagogic state, as a particularly privileged state for receiving spiritual or divine revelation. One of those is the Catholic thinker, kind of lawyer from the early 17th century, Pierre Leloyer, who was one of the first to say explicitly that among other types of divine visions, that we should be looking to that moment between waking and sleeping as yet another type of visionary experience that God would use to communicate. But perhaps no other figure has been as influential in this way as Emanuel Swedenborg, who in the kind of mid-18th century was this really fascinating figure who started out as a scientist and mathematician, eventually says that he receives a vision in the middle of his dinner that really tells him he needs to quit his job and become more of a voice for God. So he becomes a visionary, a theologian, writes many different publications, and in two of those, he explicitly says that there's this, what he calls spiritual sight. And spiritual sight is this kind of unique ability that he believes God has instilled in him or developed in him. But he says that the best time, or one of the best times, for engaging in spiritual sight is, in his words, midway between waking and sleeping. And interestingly, later on, he also says the same thing of that moment as he's waking up. He says this is also a particularly kind of fruitful moment. So now we would, of course, use the terms hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations for the experiences and phenomena accompanying those two different moments. But Emanuel Swedenborg certainly should be credited as one of the first to say explicitly that it's that liminal state that's particularly kind of fecund for divine revelation.
Would you say you dream quite vividly as well? Are you quite interested in dreams?
Very vivid dreams. Sometimes full-blown, like movie plot style dreams. Lots of detail, lots of colors and characters, and very vivid dreams.
Yes, I do dream vividly. I've always dreamt really, really vividly. A lucid dreamer will say to you, you know, I know within the dream that I'm dreaming. I don't know that I'm dreaming, but I know that I am curious in the dream to figure out where I am and what's going on. So it's very real to me at the time. It's like, I'm in this situation, I'm here right now. I just accept it. I make no distinction between, am I asleep right now or am I dreaming? I'm just present. I'm like, yeah, I'm here, but I also know I've not been here before, or I'm curious to know what is going on. Like, there is a part, you could argue, of my conscious brain that is there because I am walking around asking questions. I am fact finding. So, but I sort of actually believe that I'm there in real time. So I never really have the thought of like, oh, my body's back in bed and I'm sleeping right now. No, I'm just traveling. I'm just there. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever experienced like deja vu?
Yes, I love deja vu, and I actually kind of compare that feeling with my hallucinations. That moment in deja vu where you kind of get this fuzzy feeling and you want to hold on to it for a second to kind of feel it and analyze, what is this? Have I lived this moment before? Where is this coming from? That kind of just glowy vibe of deja vu. That's how I feel about the hallucinations, is once I just in that in between of hallucination and awake consciousness, I want to linger in that a little longer and just kind of like look at it and analyze it.
Oh, I experience very heavy deja vu, and sometimes it's creepy. And I have also experienced kind of premeditative things where I will tell my husband about something that I have dreamt about, and then that will happen that afternoon. It freaks him out quite a lot. Yeah, it freaks him out quite a lot. That does, because I do that quite a lot. He's asked me when I'll get around to doing lottery numbers, but I don't think it quite works like that.
I'm Dr. Desiree Hertag, and I'm an international author and educator, and my interest has always been in understanding consciousness, how that works, why are we here, where are we going from here. I've also had a background in the environment.
Yes, I'm Dr. J.J. Hertog. I'm a social scientist, a researcher in linguistics, archaeology, space science, cosmology, and spiritual philosophy. So I bring together really a whole academic spectrum of knowledge regarding our importance as emissaries of light, humans who are waking up to their cosmic potential.
What is the Academy for Future Science and what does it do?
The Academy for Future Science is an international organization. We're involved in everything from higher consciousness research, talking about how even the cells of our body and the DNA are part of a higher vibratory frequency. We've worked also a lot with remote viewing. And this is the understanding that our brain, through our mind, can visualize and see things that are far away. This was research done by Stanford Research Institute, where they were able to sit in California and yet see things thousands of miles away.
The Academy for Future Science is an educational program. We're also affiliated with the Parliament of World Religions and major universities in bringing forth a positive message that we have a positive future. We're essentially spiritual beings in human form or dimensional reality, and that we have a responsibility of bringing together spiritual evolution and scientific knowledge towards a new future.
What is consciousness?
Many people believe that consciousness arises in the brain. That is not my research nor my opinion. Consciousness seems to be part of a universal field, and the way we see items and events is we tap into that field, which helps to give us information. For the most part, we don't activate enough of our abilities to really know who we are and what we can do with that. And many people talk about the global consciousness field. But from our research, that of my husband's and myself, we actually can tell that there's a universal field. For example, with remote viewing, Ingo Swann was able to see, and he was one of the best remote viewers, rings around Jupiter. And no one believed him in 1973 when he saw this. But in 1979, when we sent probes there, yes, they said there's rings around Jupiter. So it's the understanding that consciousness is not related to just us. We filter information, we filter the field of what's going on around us.
Consciousness is a term that scientists are still beginning to grapple with. And many years ago, my wife and I had the privilege of working with scientists at Stanford Research Institute here in California. We published a book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time, which is really the top secret program looking at the powers of consciousness. And so some of the illustrations and documentation here is considered to be the X-Files, the real hidden story of the power of consciousness. I want to simply read a couple of the conclusions. Consciousness is involved in all measurement processes and procedures. Secondly, the greater degree that consciousness is involved, the more nonlinear the system of the mind behaves. 3, consciousness can affect micro as well as macro, such as Earth-scale phenomena. And 4, no observed event occurs without consciousness interactions. Each perception, that is, recordable, involves mind-matter interaction or mind-to-mind interaction. So in essence, consciousness is really the basis of the whole evolutionary process of life. We as humans evolve out of consciousness. We do not evolve out of the material realm according to our scientific investigations, but we evolve out of our consciousness realm. And this gives us a multidimensional ability to be in this dimension as well as other dimensions, or timelines of experience. The book I'm holding up is available through the Academy for Future Science, Mind Dynamics in Space and Time, written with Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the foremost female mathematicians in the world, who wrote more than 400 scientific papers and who was considered a candidate for the Nobel Prize before she died.
I'm turning to let go for the night. And my eyes will open. I will not know anything about. I don't even know my eyes have opened until I see the thing. And it's when I see the thing that I realise my eyes are open. And I'm telling you, I open my eyes and there's someone already there, already looking at me. Why would my brain do that? When it's the last thing why would my subconscious do that when my conscious brain just wants to go to sleep? I want to go into the dream superhighway. I don't want to be up for another half hour going, I wonder who that was. I don't want that. I know I'm not like some sort of masochist. I don't think I am. I guess why do hallucinations haunt the sick, haunt those with mental illnesses? Why do hallucination appear for people with bad eyesight, degenerative eye disease? But I don't have narcolepsy. I don't have a sleep condition that I know of. I don't have degenerative eye disease. I don't have a mental illness. I am on the pill. I have been having these things since I started taking the pill. I only get these things when I'm very relaxed, about to fall asleep. I don't want to rule out that it's some sort of gateway, merely because that would be so freaking cool. That as humans, we have within us the ability to wirelessly connect over this very specific frequency. I mean, how cool would that be?
What is the human connection with consciousness, space, and time?
There's a real question whether space and time really exist. Scientists are even looking at this right now because, in actuality, people have seen things that are going on in the future. We call it, of course, precognition. And they've also seen things that have happened in the past. Amazing. There's been a lot of tests, both at the University of Colorado Boulder, in analyzing the stock market, seeing whether something's going to go up or down. And even with amateur, what we call remote viewers, they've had 100% accuracy. One of the top remote viewers was Russell Targ, and he was playing, we'll call it, in the silver market. And he made lots of money because he used some remote viewers that told him exactly what was going to happen in the future with the silver market. And it was also 100% accuracy. So we can know the future. I would say we can't know maybe way out into the future because there's free will. And we do have that ability to choose our direction in life. So it's very hard to determine long-term relationships and long-term circumstances. I believe this is important for our future as well because people would like to predict, well, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But you know what? If we change the way we think, if we change the way we view life, then that reality, even for the whole planet, because we can do it collectively, can also change.
Well, as I observed, and by the title, consciousness is really beyond space and time, which we believe are scientific constructs to understand where we are. But in ultimate, I should say, reality or new science, future science, guided by consciousness, we begin to realize that we are not limited by space and time. These are arbitrary constructs. We are humans existing in all space. In other words, we are beyond confinement if we use the powers of consciousness expansion or higher powers of the mind and spirit working together. That sounds like a lot of terminology, which is why we need a new vocabulary. To go beyond space and time is really the quest that we are making with our space programs or space probes into space. But we realize in the greater confines of the universe that is evolving, that is multidimensional, that there is no such thing as a given space and a given time. These are all units of measurement.
We know that sleep is a biological mechanism, but what is happening psychologically when we dream?
So psychologically, for the Jungian approach, is when our consciousness goes down and then there's space for unconscious content to come up. And dreams are a form of communication of the unconscious. So the unconscious is the matrix of the dreams. But obviously dreams, they are not comprehensible for our rational mind. They are very illogical, kind of foreign to our ways of thinking. So that's why when we have a dream, we're like, oh my God, what was that? But that's because they are very symbolic, they are very metaphorical, so they come in figurative language. And that's why we have to look at them as symbols. They are like an X-ray of how is our inner life. Yeah, and they are always linked to the person who is dreaming. So we can have the same dream, but it can have completely different meanings. And that's what dreams are psychologically.
How important are dreams in relation to the investigation, exploration, and interpretation of personal insights?
So yes, dreams are very important for personal insights, especially in Jungian psychology, because they deepen and broaden our perspectives from our inner life. So they can bring new insights, things that maybe before we couldn't see, they were in our shadow, in our blind spots, let's say. And so they bring meaning and purpose. They help us see experiences or situations with other eyes or perspectives. So, and also dreams, they can come in forms of compensations. Usually our consciousness is very one-sided. We have a very unilateral attitude, and then it creates this tension between consciousness and the unconscious. And dreams, they come as forms of compensation, so that's why they can bring new insights. We can see things with other perspectives. And this is somehow some sort of homeostasis, psychological homeostasis or self-regulation of our psyche. So just like our physical wounds, our body heals, our psychological wounds are also healed by dreams, by metaphors, symbols, well, spirituality, many forms of things, and dreams are an example. So yes, they are very important psychic functions in our lives, I would say.
What is astral projection and the astral plane?
Astral projection is when the part, I suppose, that makes us, our mind, comes out of our body and travels in another dimension, what we call the astral plane. And in that place, you can go anywhere, both in time and space. You can encounter other beings in the astral plane, not all good, some bad, and you might find yourself fighting with beings on the other side, being attacked by them. So it's not necessarily a safe thing to do, but it can have some benefits, not just for you, but for other people that you might help when you're on the other side. You can do the craziest stuff, like on one occasion, it was very Hollywood. I sort of come out my body and I knew that there was a negative being in the room with me, and I was drawing pentagrams of fire around my bed with my finger. I don't know why I thought to do that. In the here and now, I would know logically this is not possible, but on the other side, you're able to do anything that you want to. In that way, it's magic. You're using magic. It's very like, charmed. So yeah, that's astral projection.
Can you tell us your thoughts and experiences about the different types of interdimensional beings?
Interdimensional would be beings who are simply in another dimension from the dimension that we are in. Things like angels and demons that are able to penetrate our world, or aliens, whatever they are, they're extraterrestrial. They're not of this world.
We use what we call the left side of the brain, the logical mind, mostly when we're awake. But when we're going to sleep, our brain shifts. Now, it always has these different frequencies, the delta, the beta, the alpha. But basically, when we're going to sleep, we're moving into an alpha frequency state. And when we do that, we're starting to lose that logical, hard set, intellectual mind. And the creative side, not only of us, and that's why I think some people see images and pictures because their creative side is getting more activated. But in addition to that, with the alpha frequency, we can kind of shift from what we would call the 3rd/4th dimension, which is space and time, to working in other dimensions. My work with remote viewing has shown our brain can actually operate in 8 dimensions. And some of this has been confirmed by the Blue Brain Project out of Switzerland. They saw the neurons acting in our heads, and it actually showed that we are actually operating in beyond just what we would logically think of in the 3rd/4th dimension. So, do other beings exist? Absolutely. Why don't we see them? And we'll go from everything from ghosts to extraterrestrials to angelic powers. Well, we don't see them because we're stuck in this logical mind. And when we relax that energy, when we move more to our insightful self, we start seeing other realities. They do exist. They just don't exist where we can physically see them in this 3-dimensional reality.
The importance of understanding what is called paraphysical phenomena such as beings or ghost-like energy forms that one sees, for example, during the night cycle, is an indication of the greater ontology of existence, that the mind does problem solving at night, things that it doesn't understand during the daytime with all of the information, the interactivity of individuals. Sometimes during the night cycle, the mind begins to catalog and co-create a deeper interpretation of what it doesn't understand in objective reality. So the subjective reality can be a springboard for good as well as negative associations of how we understand these holographic or bioholographic life forms or appearances. In short, we are always swimming in the sea of consciousness, and it should not bother us that we see in our sea of consciousness everything from the yellow submarine to sharks to extraterrestrial phenomena. It's all there in some fashion if we are to look at the global heritage of what poets, scholars, and thinkers have recorded down through history. We're no different than our ancestors thousands of years ago who wrote abstractly or metaphysically of several of the realities we see during the night cycle, which has to be fully understood and appreciated as we now go through this great leap forward in consciousness understanding.
The dream state, I think, is a unique place for everybody. But I also think that dreaming can be really personal. Yes, I do dream. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. I think it varies on the day I've had and the stresses that I've been under. When it comes to trance-like states, I do believe when we go to sleep, we get in these trance where we can connect with others. For me, it's about the connection that we have with our own soul, but also with maybe souls that have already passed. And I think sometimes they're only trying to communicate to let us know that they're okay, or to give us some perspective on our life here. And I think that's really important for us.
Visions do present themselves in that half sleeping, half waking state. I've seen beings that I think were angels who were above my bed, and it was like a platform that they were looking down from. One of them reached down and said, "You have to tell people about us." And I said, "I will." And he said, "No, you must promise that you'll tell people about us." I said, I will, I promise. And my head and my shoulders were off my pillow, and I could feel this. And when I came out of this state, I felt myself go back. And then I kind of came out of it. I would say that that was a half sleeping, half wakeful state. I understand that in that state that you do experience sleep paralysis. I think that in some cases that can be taken advantage of by other things. I don't think when you experience what some might call hallucinations, and what may be hallucinations or dreams that we're having while we're still in that sleeping state, that doesn't, I don't think, matter as much as the experience itself. Regardless of whether it's a sleep condition, regardless of whether it's a dream, it's very real to the person experiencing it. It's an in-between state in many different ways, you know, and I came to the conclusion eventually that it didn't matter. It didn't matter to me whether it was found out to be a sleep condition that I had, or whether I actually was having visions of certain things, you know, like angels or demons or whatever. And I'm not unique in having these experiences. Many people for millennia have had these experiences. So they happen. It's not a lie that people are telling, you know, they're relating their experiences as they see it. That, I think, is, for me, that's the important thing, and that's the relationship I think that I have with these visions that I might have.
I have had some messages and communications while falling asleep. Normally these come when I know I've got a busy day with clients the next day, and sometimes they'll give me something that'll come through in my dreamlike state. And luckily enough, I'm the type of person that will remember these things, and I'll bring it to the client the next day and I'll say, well, funny, I had this in my dream last night. And they'll say to me, wow, how did you know that? And I'll say, well, it wasn't me, it's your loved ones. But they contacted me through my dream. And I think that happens to me probably more regularly than I would generally think about. It's only doing this that has made me really think about it.
What might the visual geometric patterns and moving objects represent?
Well, everything is geometry. Our whole body is a living geometry, and it's constantly moving. We only see ourselves as a solid form, but if you look at the inner cells of our body, even our brains, things are really in geometry. Now, first and foremost, in the universe, I believe, was consciousness. Higher consciousness levels that came down into our third and fourth dimensional reality. But in actuality, when we're going into that sleep state, we're starting to see what could be called the matrix. And I do believe there's a matrix, not so much like the movie, but like the flow of life, that you have a certain vibration and you move into that vibration. Everything is vibration. One of my books that I wrote with my husband is called Sound. Literally, everything is these frequencies. Now, you think sound is just something you hear in your head. It's not. There's the whole study of cymatics, and that is sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is sound. Sound is sacred geometry. In some of the Hypnagogia experiences, they actually hear sounds. Others see geometry. Technically, it's all the same thing. Sound is geometry. It's all one. So basically, you're using parts of your inner mind, parts of your inner visualization, because you're not seeing anything with your eyes, and you're tapping into, I would say, the matrix of life.
The question is sacred geometries, and my wife and I have written a series of books in linguistics, musical linguistics, called The Names of God. For example, this, which I'm holding up, Salvator Mundi, the Savior of the Earth, goes into the descriptions of geometric forms, circles, spheres, vortexes, seen by artists that have illustrated this book. So this is part of the natural vocabulary that we have. The mind dreams in color and technical language. Over the years has suppressed this until recent times. We began now in the 1960s and 70s to understand that it is a natural principle of life to understand that everything is in mathematics and consciousness, and it's the blend of the two that helps us decipher the meaning of a circle. It could come from an archetypal symbol of living near an Indian reservation or indigenous people. It could come really from understanding the triangle, because we have within our brain what is called pyramidal brain cells. That is to say, the geometry is built into the the wetware of our brain. It could also come from watching too much television at night where there are bad symbols, and one goes to bed with a sense of negativity, suppression, or oppression. I and my wife, however, feel that we must think always of the positive, and we must be part of that 2% of humanity, always thinking of the positive, because there we can solve things more quickly. There we understand the spiral of life that we're connected with, the ongoing dynamics of the universe, and we as a micro-universe or universe within the universe can put the two together for meaningful purposes and interpretation. And finally, we're moving into a whole area now of new science, the science of consciousness, which allows us to understand what multidimensionality is all about. That we think on many levels, we see on many levels, we have precognition, or thoughts before they are manifested in logical form on many levels. So life works on many levels. The people of ancient India use the word chakra, which means circle or dynamic wheel. And our body, in terms of biophysics, is a series of 7 basic chakras or energy centers. So as we put East and West science together, we realize that we are a collection of many realities in spinning relationships. We are a wheel of life within a wheel of light. We are a cosmic creation on a microbiological level. And the question is not why, but to simply open our eyes, our spiritual eyes, in addition to our physical eye, and realize that we are a completely unified universe, consciously, physically, and spiritually.
When the first one happened to me, I was on a business trip in Rome for the British Council, and I was just going to sleep. I just prepared some notes for the next day's meeting. I was meeting someone from the Italian embassy. It was just a fairly normal kind of, I was excited, because it was my first trip abroad representing the British Council. I was quite young at the time, but full of confidence, full of excitement. I'd also just started a new relationship, hence why I was on the pill. And, overall life was good. Everything was fine. I went to bed that night. I put my notes down. I went to bed. And as I was drifting off to sleep, I just kind of opened my eyes, and flying towards me in the dark of my room, in this hotel room in Via Cavour, was the outline of what looked like a cherub, like a biblical cherub with golden curls, a boy about 5 years old, smiling, a gorgeous, really soft, beautiful smile. And my first thought was, okay, what is this? I'm going insane. Like, this is a really bad time to kind of lose my mind, because he was clear as day, like a holographic image flying towards my face. I thought, I've got this meeting tomorrow, I can't be seeing stuff like this. And then, of course, you think, was that a ghost? I'm in Rome, this is an old hotel. Is my imagination being influenced by Roman architecture, or because obviously Rome is the seat of the papacy, and I was thinking all these things, why am I seeing this angelic kind of cherub? And I jumped up, I put the light on, and I didn't sleep for a few hours after that, because it was that impactful, it was that real, it felt that real. And also, you don't know at that time that the only reason it's happened is because I was falling asleep. You just know that it's happened. So it raises all sorts of questions. I had to go into the next day acting normal. Obviously, the next night it didn't happen. The night after that it didn't happen. But the impact of that first vision was so powerful that I have actually written 2 books now about it. So what fascinates me is, out of one real experience, a nighttime phenomena, I built an entire world from that. It took me ages, it took me 6 years to write this. And yeah, I've put a lot of time, a lot of money into it, and I play around with, I'm very passionate about politics, so I do have a dig at oppressive, corrupt political powers in this book. I also play around, like I say, with there's an alien who, when I say alien, she looks fairly similar, but she is given downloads and communications to this Earth girl, Aurora, and telling her, when you sleep and when you dream, you're traveling, this is what's happening, this is what's, these are things that we learn about ourselves after millions of years of introspection that you don't have. You're still quite a young planet, you're still killing each other, you're still destroying things like a barbarian. So it's all that kind of thing. And there's a little bit of a cosmic race against time to save Earth and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I mean, that literally came out of that one experience. And then during lockdown, I was furloughed and had a little bit of time, and I wrote the prequel novella, 6 Shamans and a Visionary. And because I had the time, I actually wrote this in 6 weeks. So 6 years, 6 weeks. But again, this just goes back to about 15 years before that novel, and just tells you a little bit about how they set up their new society after a new awakening, and again, more world building and all the rest of it. And I just find it fascinating that not only has this been something that I have been actively experiencing for over 20 years, it's really kind of left its mark on my real life, in terms of what I've chosen to do with my time in writing this book and promoting this book, and just having to just get that story out of me. And yeah, I mean, this documentary is just a natural progression from that point. And one of the best things about this particular project has been finding other people who experience this, because it's the best feeling to know that you're not alone in this, and working together to find ways to navigate it, and it not be such a negative thing or a life debilitating thing. So that's been a real positive that's come out of it.
here's the funny thing. In taking the step back into the self, rejecting the lures of modernity, we actually managed to move forward technologically and all the rest. It was the strangest awakening ever. By having this knowledge, we gained perspective. We learned about the joys of play.
My advice for people who have experienced hypnagogia is to please understand that you are tapping into something more than what your three-dimensional normal reality is.
What is spirituality? So, in the context of your profession, what is a visual hallucination?
Why spiders? Why people? Why geometric patterns? These three specific things keep coming up again and again, and I think that's interesting.
So Carl Gustav Jung, he was a Swiss psychiatrist. He worked in his early years, he worked closely with Freud.
And there are, of course, really interesting findings from kind of contemporary research around religion and hypnagogia.
But there's a whole set of other disorders where the degeneration is in the eye, nothing to do with the brain at all.
Finally, after generations, the scientists and psychologists are realizing our mind can be taken off the linear construct of space and time. We're multidimensional beings.
I do believe in ghosts.
I do believe in ghosts, spirits, energies. I'm not convinced I have the senses to pick up on them as much as I wish I did.